Have you ever been humiliated so deeply, so deliberately, that you felt the air leave your lungs, yet somehow, instead of collapsing, something inside you woke up? That's exactly what happened to me the night I was invited to dinner with my boyfriend Adrian's family, the Blackwoods. Yes, those Blackwoods. Billionaires. Politicians. Investors. People whose last names opened doors I didn't even know existed. I should have been nervous walking into that chandelier-lit private dining hall, but I wasn't. Adrian told me his father was a little intense, but would warm up eventually. I believed him. After all, I grew up with nothing, a small apartment, hand-me-downs, working since I was 15. I wasn't ashamed of it. I thought maybe they'd respect my honesty. Instead, from the moment Victor Blackwood laid eyes on me, I felt it. That silent evaluation. That cold calculation. He smiled, but the kind that cuts. Still, I kept my head high. I answered his questions politely. I sat surrounded by 23 elite guests wearing jewelry worth more than my entire life savings. I didn't shrink. Not until Victor leaned forward, eyes gleaming, and said the 5 words that ignited everything that followed. Have you ever heard an insult so sharp it didn't just sting, it rewired something in you? Because when Victor Blackwood leaned back in his chair, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Street garbage in a borrowed dress," the entire room didn't just go silent. It stopped breathing. I swear you could hear the chandelier humming above us. 23 guests froze mid, wine sip. Forks hovered in the air. Even the waitstaff stopped moving. It was as if someone had pressed pause on reality. Adrian's face went pale. He opened his mouth, maybe to defend me, maybe to apologize. But nothing came out. His father's power had always been like a shadow over him, dark, massive, impossible to escape. Eleanor, Adrian's mother, tried to hide her shock by adjusting her napkin for the 10th time. Her eyes screamed embarrassment, but her lips stayed shut. No one challenged Victor. No one ever did. And me? My first instinct was to disappear. To slip under the table, vanish, let the humiliation swallow me whole. Because that's what people like Victor expect, submission, silence. But instead, something shifted. My heartbeat slowed. My shoulders straightened. And the shame he wanted me to drown in evaporated, replaced by a cold, crystal-clear focus. Slowly, deliberately, I pushed my chair back and stood up. And when I did, Victor's smirk faded, just a little. He didn't know it yet, but that moment was the beginning of everything falling apart. Have you ever seen a man who thought he owned the entire world suddenly realize he might not own the room he's standing in? Because when I stood up slow, calm, unshaken, Victor's smirk twitched. Just a flicker. But enough. He expected tears. He expected shame. He expected me to crumble. Instead, I lifted my chin and smiled. Not a big smile. Not a vengeful one. A quiet, calculated smile. The kind that says, you have no idea what's coming. The guests shifted in their seats, unsure whether they were witnessing a scandal or the beginning of a corporate civil war. Adrian whispered, "Arya, please," but even he didn't know whether he wanted me to sit or speak. I looked Victor dead in the eye and said, "Thank you for your honesty." You could feel the confusion pulse through the room. He narrowed his gaze. "Honesty? You think I'm joking, girl? You don't belong here. Not at this table. Not in this family." "Maybe not," I said. "But belonging is such a fragile thing, isn't it? Especially when the truth starts shifting the ground under your feet." That's when his expression changed. A flicker of recognition. A hint of fear. Because he knew exactly what truth I was referring to. I had spent weeks researching the Blackwood Empire, not to impress him but to understand him. The cracks in his empire weren't small. They were fault lines. And he had no idea who else knew. Just then, a phone buzzed at the far end of the table. Victor ignored it. But the second one, he couldn't. Have you ever witnessed the exact moment a man realizes he's no longer in control? It doesn't happen with shouting. It happens with silence and the vibration of a single phone. Victor's jaw tightened as the first buzz echoed softly across the polished table. He dismissed it with an irritated wave. But then another phone vibrated. Then a third. Then a fourth. This time, no one ignored it. "Charles Whitman," A senior board member seated 2 chairs down, glanced at his screen, and the color drained from his face. He immediately straightened, his napkin falling into his lap. His eyes shot to Victor in disbelief. Across the table, Victor's assistant, Maya, stiffened like she'd been struck. She didn't even check her phone. She already knew. The room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but subtly, like a shift in atmospheric pressure before a storm hits. Victor finally checked his screen. His hand froze midair. He blinked once, twice, and then he whispered a single word under his breath, barely audible but unmistakable. Impossible. He tried to stand, but Charles grabbed his arm and hissed, "It's out. All of it." Gasps rippled through the table. Eleanor clasped her pearl necklace like a lifeline. Adrian looked back and forth between his father and me, confusion merging into dawning horror. Because now the guests weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at him. The great Victor Blackwood exposed in real time. And the truth spreading across those glowing screens? That was the same truth Victor thought I would never dare speak. Have you ever seen a man who believed he was untouchable suddenly realize he was standing on a trapdoor he built himself? Because that's exactly what Victor looked like, a king discovering his throne was made of sand. He tried to steady himself, gripping the edge of the table. This is fabricated, he snapped, voice trembling. Some pathetic attempt to sabotage me. But Charles Whitman wasn't having it. It came from inside your company, he said coldly. These are internal files, Victor. Timestamped. Signed. Archived. A ripple of panic spread across the guests. Some checked their phones. Others whispered urgently behind napkins. Eleanor reached for Victor's arm, but he shook her off violently. Then Maya, quiet, loyal, invisible Maya, finally lifted her head. Her voice didn't shake. "Sir," she said softly, "I told you this would happen." Victor spun toward her. You did this." "No," she answered, calm as glass. "You did. I just stopped hiding it." Every guest inhaled sharply. Victor was unraveling. His arrogance was gone, replaced by raw desperation. "You're all making a mistake." He jabbed a finger at me. "This girl manipulated you." She's enough." Adrian's voice cut through the chaos. He stood from his chair, for the first time not shrinking beneath his father. "Dad, look at yourself." Victor froze. Because his own son no longer stood with him. And then the restaurant manager approached, her voice respectful but firm. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Have you ever watched a man who thought he ruled every room suddenly realize he no longer ruled this one? Because when the restaurant manager asked Victor Blackwood to leave, the shock on his face wasn't just humiliation, it was disbelief. Pure, stunned disbelief. Victor looked around the table, searching for someone, anyone, who would defend him. Someone to stand up, speak up, rescue his ego the way he'd crushed others for decades. But no one moved. Not Eleanor. Not Charles. Not the investors. Not even Adrian. In the end, he walked toward the exit alone, the clacking of his expensive shoes echoing like a retreat. But right before he stepped through the doorway, he turned. His eyes locked with mine, furious, wounded, confused. Like he still couldn't understand how the girl he called street garbage had stood up. And somehow ended up with more dignity than he ever had. I stepped forward, not to taunt him, but to speak the truth he had spent his life avoiding. "You thought humiliating me would make you powerful," I told him quietly. "But real power? It doesn't come from wealth. Or fear. It comes from character." He didn't reply. He couldn't. He left without another word, leaving the empire he built trembling behind him. Adrian exhaled shakily and reached for my hand. "Arya, I'm so sorry." But I wasn't looking for an apology. I was looking at a room full of people who finally saw the truth about him and about me. And as we walked out together, I realized something. He tried to break me publicly. Instead, he exposed himself.